Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. The dim lights of the Golden Palm Bar flickered gently as Tracey Briggs wiped the counter with slow, practiced motions. The bar, located in the heart of Riverton, was lively most nights, filled with music, laughter, and the occasional heated arguments, but tonight, Tracey's thoughts were far from the noise around her. It was a quiet, aching evening, the kind that always reminded her of Fred. Fred had been the love of her life. They met in college, two young dreamers who believed the world was at their feet. He had a deep, infectious laugh that could brighten even the darkest of days. Tracey still remembered the nights they stayed up talking about their future, dreaming of a home filled with warmth, children, and laughter. But life had other plans. Cancer had snatched Fred away before he could even hold his newborn daughter Jennifer. He fought bravely, but in the end, Tracey was left alone with only grief and a baby to care for. Jennifer became Tracey's entire world. From the moment she laid eyes on her tiny, fragile daughter, Tracey had vowed to protect her at all costs. She promised herself that Jennifer would never know the depths of poverty or want that she herself had experienced growing up in Riverton. Every sleepless night, every tear, every sacrifice was worth it when Jennifer smiled at her with those bright, curious eyes that mirrored Fred's. At just 25, Tracey found herself navigating single motherhood in a town where everyone knew each other's business. Whispers followed her wherever she went, pitying glances from the elderly women at church, unsolicited advice from neighbors who believed she'd never find a man again. "You're too young to waste away, Tracey," they'd say, shaking their heads as if she were a tragic figure in a local folk tale. But Tracey didn't care. Her only priority was Jennifer's well-being. Her job at the Golden Palm Bar paid enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, but it came at a price. Late shifts meant she often came home exhausted, her body aching from hours of standing. Yet no matter how tired she was, she always made time for Jennifer. The little girl would wait up for her, eyes lighting up when her mother walked through the door. Together, they would sit at the kitchen table, sharing stories about their day. Jennifer loved to draw, and Tracey would proudly display each new creation on the refrigerator. "Mommy, do you think Daddy would have liked this one?" Jennifer once asked, holding up a colorful sketch of a happy family standing beneath a rainbow. Tracey's heart tightened, but she smiled softly. "He would have loved it, sweetheart. He's always watching over us." The years passed in a blur of small triumphs and quiet struggles. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes and modest gifts, but the love between mother and daughter was abundant. Tracey's friends Angela and Tina often visited, bringing laughter and a sense of normalcy to her otherwise hectic life. The three women had been inseparable since high school, their bond strengthened by shared experiences of heartbreak and resilience. Angela was the bold, outspoken one, always quick with a joke or a sarcastic remark. Tina, on the other hand, was gentler, more nurturing, often playing the role of peacemaker when tensions arose. Together, they formed a support system that Tracey relied on more than she cared to admit. "You need to start living again, Tracey," Angela said one evening as they sat in Tracey's small living room, sipping wine. "Fred wouldn't want you to shut yourself off from happiness." Tracey sighed, shaking her head. "My happiness is Jennifer. I don't need anyone else." "But she's growing up," Tina chimed in softly. "One day she'll have her own life." "You deserve love too," Tracey didn't respond. Deep down, she knew her friends had a point. Jennifer was already a teenager, and the years ahead would bring new challenges and independence. Still, the thought of letting another man into her life filled her with fear and doubt. What if he didn't accept Jennifer? What if he turned out to be someone untrustworthy? She couldn't bear the thought of exposing her daughter to potential harm. For now, Tracey chose to ignore her friend's advice. She had built a life around her daughter, and that was enough. At least that's what she told herself. Yet on nights when the house grew too quiet and the shadows of loneliness crept in, Tracey couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more waiting for her out there. As the bar's patrons began to thin out, Tracey finished her shift and headed home. The streets of Riverton were eerily silent, the distant hum of streetlights the only sound accompanying her footsteps. She thought of Jennifer, likely waiting for her as always, and smiled. No matter how hard life became, as long as she had her daughter, she could face anything. But life had a way of testing even the strongest of promises. Unbeknownst to Tracey, the choices she would soon make would lead her down a path of unimaginable pain and regret, shattering the delicate world she had fought so hard to build. The bright morning sun streamed through the curtains of Tracey's modest home in Riverton. Today was a special day, Jennifer's 16th birthday. Tracey hummed softly to herself as she decorated a small cake with pink frosting. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and joy. Despite her limited income, Tracey had saved up for months to give her daughter a memorable birthday. She had planned a small gathering with Jennifer's close friends, complete with balloons, music, and laughter. It was a moment of happiness Tracey cherished. Jennifer had grown into a smart, vibrant young girl who often reminded Tracey of Fred. She had his gentle eyes and an independent streak that sometimes caused tension between mother and daughter, but they were close. Jennifer always understood her mother's sacrifices and never demanded more than Tracey could give. That morning, when Jennifer woke to the sight of her favorite breakfast, pancakes drizzled with syrup and strawberries, she smiled brightly. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best," she said, wrapping her arms around Tracey. "No, you are. Happy birthday, my darling," Tracey whispered, holding her close. As the day progressed, Jennifer's friends arrived, filling the house with laughter. Angela and Tina also stopped by, helping Tracey serve snacks and drinks. The celebration was a success, but as the guests began to leave, Angela took the opportunity to corner Tracey in the kitchen. "Tracey, we need to talk," Angela began, setting down a tray of empty glasses. "Oh no, here we go again," Tracey muttered, rolling her eyes. "I'm serious," Angela continued. "Jennifer's growing up. She's practically an adult now. You've done an amazing job raising her, but you deserve happiness too. It's time you think about dating again." "I agree," Tina added softly, joining the conversation. "You've spent so many years putting Jennifer first. We're not saying you should neglect her, but you need companionship, Tracey. Someone who can support you and make you feel loved again." Tracey sighed deeply, wiping her hands on a towel. "I don't know, you guys. It's been so long since I even thought about dating. What if it doesn't work out? What if he doesn't accept Jennifer?" "Not every man is a monster," Angela countered, crossing her arms. "We'll help you. In fact, I've already been talking to someone who might be a good match for you. His name is Benson. We met him on a dating app and he seems decent." Tracey frowned. The idea of meeting someone through a dating app didn't sit well with her. It felt impersonal and risky. But Angela was persistent, and over the next few days, she continued to nudge Tracey towards giving it a try. Eventually, Tracey relented, agreeing to meet Benson for coffee. The cafe on Oak Street was cozy and quiet, perfect for a first meeting. Tracey arrived early, nervously adjusting her blouse and checking her reflection in the window. She hadn't been on a date in years and felt out of her element. When Benson finally arrived, Tracey was struck by his easy smile and confident demeanor. He was tall, with a clean-cut appearance and warm brown eyes that seemed to put her at ease. "Tracey, right?" he said, extending his hand. "Yes, you must be Benson," she replied, shaking his hand. Their conversation started awkwardly, with Tracey stumbling over her words, but Benson had a way of making her laugh. He told stories about his travels, his job as a logistics manager, and his childhood in the neighboring town of Maroma. By the time they finished their coffee, Tracey found herself enjoying his company more than she expected. "You're different," Benson said as they walked outside. "I like that. You're real, not like most women I've met." Tracey blushed slightly. It had been a long time since anyone had paid her a genuine compliment. Over the next few weeks, Benson and Tracey continued to see each other. He was attentive, always calling to check on her and sending thoughtful gifts. One evening, he surprised her by showing up at the bar after her shift with a bouquet of roses. Tracey was touched by the gesture. "Benson, you didn't have to do this," she said, smiling shyly. I wanted to. You've been working so hard. You deserve to be treated like a queen, he replied smoothly. Tracey began to let her guard down, finding herself drawn to Benson's charm. Angela and Tina were thrilled that she was finally giving love another chance. However, Jennifer wasn't as enthusiastic. Mom, do you really have to date him? Jennifer asked one evening. What's wrong with Benson? He's been nothing but kind to us, Tracey replied, frowning. I don't trust him, Jennifer admitted. Something feels off about him. Sweetheart, you're just not used to seeing me with someone. Give him a chance, okay? Jennifer didn't argue further but remained wary. Meanwhile, Benson continued to win over Tracey with his seemingly thoughtful gestures. He started visiting their home more often, bringing gifts for both mother and daughter. At first, Tracey appreciated his presence, believing she had finally found someone who cared for both her and Jennifer. Yet beneath the surface, subtle signs of manipulation began to emerge. Benson's compliments occasionally carried hints of control. Comments about how Tracey should style her hair or how she should spend her evenings. But Tracey, blinded by his charm and her desire for companionship, brushed off these small red flags. For the first time in years, Tracey felt hope, unaware that her new beginning was quietly unraveling into a nightmare she couldn't yet see. The evening breeze swept gently through the small, neatly furnished living room of Tracey's home in Riverton. Benson sat comfortably on the couch, his legs crossed casually as he watched Jennifer unpack the gifts he had brought that evening. A bouquet of lilies sat on the table, a gesture Tracey found romantic, but which Jennifer regarded with suspicion. Tracey stood by the doorway, smiling warmly as she observed Benson's effort to bond with her daughter. This one is for you, Jennifer, Benson said, handing her a neatly wrapped package. His tone was friendly, almost too friendly. Jennifer hesitated before taking the box, forcing a polite smile. Thanks, she muttered. It's nothing. I just thought you might like it, he replied. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. Jennifer's stomach twisted uneasily, but she said nothing. Tracey noticed her daughter's hesitance and sighed inwardly. Jennifer had been cold toward Benson since the beginning, and Tracey chalked it up to typical teenage stubbornness. Come on, sweetheart, don't be rude. Benson has been nothing but kind to us, Tracey said gently. Jennifer said no more, opening the box to reveal a new phone. It was an expensive model, far beyond anything Tracey could afford. For a moment, Jennifer's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected this, but the awe quickly faded, replaced by unease. It felt too much like a bribe. Wow, thank you, she said, her voice devoid of enthusiasm. She placed the phone on the table and excused herself to her room. As she climbed the stairs, her mind raced. Something about Benson wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Back in the living room, Benson leaned toward Tracey, resting a hand on her arm. Teenagers, right? They're so hard to please. Tracey chuckled softly, brushing aside her concerns. She'll warm up to you. It's just an adjustment period. She's protective of me. Understandable, Benson replied smoothly, his eyes darkening for a split second before his smile returned. But I want to assure you, Tracey, I'm here for the long haul. I care about both of you. Tracey's heart fluttered at his words. It had been so long since someone had made her feel this way, wanted, cherished. She leaned into him, allowing herself to believe that perhaps this was finally her chance at happiness. Over the following weeks, Benson became a regular presence in their lives. He visited almost daily, often without warning. At first, Tracey found his attentiveness endearing. He would arrive after her shift at the bar with takeout, flowers, or small gifts. He helped fix things around the house, from a leaky faucet to a broken chair leg. His presence was comforting, a steady hand in her otherwise chaotic world. Jennifer, however, remained wary. Benson's unannounced visits disrupted her routines, and she found herself dreading his presence. He always seemed to be watching her, his eyes following her movements in a way that made her skin crawl. One night she decided to speak up. Mom, I don't like how he just shows up all the time, Jennifer said as they sat at the kitchen table. It's like he's trying to take over. Tracey sighed, rubbing her temples. Jennifer, you need to stop being so negative. Benson is helping us. He cares about me and you. Why can't you just be happy for me? I'm not saying you shouldn't be happy, Jennifer replied, her voice rising slightly in frustration. But something feels off. He's weird. He's always watching me and it creeps me out. Tracey chuckled, dismissing her daughter's concern. Oh, sweetheart, you're being paranoid. He's just trying to make sure you're comfortable. Maybe you're imagining things. I'm not imagining it, Mom. He stood in my room the other night, just staring at me. Tracey's laughter deepened, as though Jennifer had just told a childish ghost story. Jennifer, really? Maybe you were dreaming. Benson is not a monster. He's a good man. I think you're just not used to having someone new in our lives. Jennifer clenched her fists, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She knew her mother wouldn't listen. Tracey was too caught up in her newfound romance to see Benson for who he truly was, or at least who Jennifer suspected he was. That night, Jennifer lay awake in her room, fear gripping her as she heard Benson's footsteps echo softly in the hallway. Meanwhile, Benson's control over Tracey grew subtly. He began making comments about how she should dress for their dates, suggesting more revealing outfits under the guise of boosting her confidence. He offered to manage their household finances, insisting that Tracey deserved to be pampered and shouldn't have to worry about bills. Whenever she hesitated, he would flash that disarming smile and say, "Don't you trust me?" Slowly but surely, Tracey began to relinquish control. She didn't notice how Benson's influence seeped into every corner of her life. He decided what groceries they bought, how their weekends were spent, and even which friends Tracey should prioritize. Angela and Tina expressed mild concern over how quickly things were moving, but Tracey brushed them off. In her mind, Benson was the perfect partner, caring, dependable, and attentive. Jennifer, however, couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were spiraling into something dangerous. Each day, the distance between mother and daughter grew wider, and Jennifer's fear deepened. She knew she had to find a way to protect herself, but with Tracey refusing to see reason, Jennifer felt more isolated than ever. Benson's presence loomed like a shadow over their once peaceful home, and Jennifer could only hope that the nightmare wouldn't get worse. But deep down she knew it would. The early morning sunlight peeked through the curtains as Jennifer sat at the edge of her bed, her mind racing with unease. Last night she had woken suddenly to the sound of footsteps outside her room. For a terrifying moment, she thought someone had entered. She had remained frozen under her blanket until the sound faded away. She knew it was Benson. It always seemed to be him, but convincing her mother would be another battle altogether. Downstairs, Tracey bustled about the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared breakfast. Benson had already left for work after spending the night over again, and Tracey was in an unusually cheerful mood. She didn't notice the tension in Jennifer's face when she joined her at the table. "Morning, sweetheart," Tracey greeted with a bright smile. "I made your favorite omelette with cheese." Jennifer barely acknowledged her mother as she sat down. She stabbed her fork into the food without appetite, her mind preoccupied with how to approach the topic. She didn't want to fight again, but she couldn't stay silent anymore. "Mom," Jennifer began hesitantly, "we need to talk about Benson." Tracey's smile faded slightly, and she set down her coffee cup. "What about him?" "I don't trust him," Jennifer said firmly, meeting her mother's eyes. "I know you think I'm making things up, but he's not who you think he is. He sneaks around the house at night. He was outside my room again yesterday." Tracey sighed, her patience wearing thin. "Jennifer, we've been through this. You're imagining things. Benson has never given me any reason to doubt him." "He's not giving you a reason because he's good at hiding who he really is." Jennifer's voice rose with frustration. "Mom, please listen to me. Something is wrong with him. I can feel it." Tracey shook her head, crossing her arms defensively. "Jennifer, I know it's hard having someone new in our lives, but you have to give him a chance. He loves us. He's been nothing but supportive since we started dating." Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Mom, love doesn't mean controlling what you do or sneaking around at night. You're too blinded by him to see the truth." The comment stung. Tracey's face hardened as she stood abruptly from the table. "You have no right to speak to me like that. Benson has done more for us than anyone else. He's helping us, Jennifer. I need you to stop this nonsense." Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes, but she swallowed her words. She knew arguing wouldn't change anything. Tracey had made up her mind, and no amount of reasoning would convince her otherwise. Feeling defeated, Jennifer pushed her plate away and left the kitchen. Tracey watched her go, torn between guilt and anger. She didn't understand why her daughter was being so difficult. To her, Benson was a blessing, a man who had brought stability and happiness into their lives. Why couldn't Jennifer see that? As the days passed, Benson's presence in their home grew more suffocating. He no longer asked before staying over. He simply arrived with an overnight bag in hand. He began making subtle changes to their routines. The meals Tracey prepared now had to meet his specific tastes. If she came home late from work, he would question her with a tone that was less concerned and more accusatory. At first, Tracey didn't notice how controlling he was becoming. She rationalized his behavior as him simply being involved in their lives. "I just want us to have structure," Benson would say, his voice warm and reassuring. "You've been doing everything alone for so long. Let me take some of the burden off you." Tracey nodded gratefully, unaware of how much control she was surrendering. He began suggesting that she limit her time with Angela and Tina, claiming they were a bad influence. "They don't understand what it's like to be in a committed relationship," he told her one evening. "They might give you bad advice." Tracey hesitated but eventually agreed. Slowly, she started distancing herself from her friends, spending all her free time with Benson. To her, it felt like they were building a life together. To Jennifer, it felt like a slow invasion. One night, Jennifer woke again to find her bedroom door slightly ajar. Her heart pounded as she listened carefully. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. She mustered her courage and stepped out, only to see a shadow disappear into the guest room where Benson stayed. Her hands trembled as she crept back to her bed. She had to find a way to protect herself, but she felt trapped, isolated from the one person she should have been able to rely on, her mother. Tracey, meanwhile, was oblivious to the growing storm. She continued to believe that Jennifer's behavior was nothing more than teenage rebellion. Whenever Benson reassured her, she clung to his words like a lifeline. He knew exactly how to manipulate her insecurities, always framing his suggestions as acts of love and concern. "You've sacrificed so much, Tracey," he would say, holding her close. "Let me take care of you. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Those words filled a void Tracey had carried for years. She didn't realize that the man she had entrusted with her heart was slowly tightening his grip on every aspect of her life. Jennifer saw it though, and with each passing day her fear grew stronger. But no matter how much she tried to warn her mother, her words fell on deaf ears. Tracey was caught in a web of deception she couldn't see, and by the time the truth revealed itself, it would be far too late. Jennifer sat on her bed, clutching her knees to her chest. The walls of her room felt like they were closing in as dread crept over her. She had spent countless nights in fear, hearing the subtle movements in the hallway outside her door. The shadows under her eyes deepened from sleepless nights, and the tension in her chest refused to ease. Benson's presence was suffocating, and no one seemed to believe her, not even her own mother. Tracey, on the other hand, was completely absorbed in her relationship with Benson. He had slowly become the center of her world. He constantly reassured her that they were building a future together, and Tracey clung to those words as if her life depended on it. In her mind, he was the one person who had brought stability after years of loneliness and struggle. She had convinced herself that Jennifer's unease was nothing more than jealousy or a teenager's resistance to change. But Jennifer knew better. Her instincts screamed at her that Benson wasn't who he appeared to be. The way he watched her, the way he always seemed to be lurking nearby, filled her with a deep sense of dread. She had tried everything to warn her mother, but her words were dismissed as childish paranoia. Tracey would either laugh or scold her for being disrespectful, and each rejection drove a wedge further between them. One evening, Jennifer sat across from her mother at the dinner table. Benson was unusually quiet, eating methodically as if lost in thought. Jennifer kept her eyes down, her appetite gone. Tracey tried to make light conversation, but tension in the room was palpable. "Jennifer, you hardly touched your food," Tracey said, her tone a mix of concern and frustration. "I'm not hungry," Jennifer replied curtly. "You can't keep sulking like this," Tracey continued. "Benson has been trying so hard to make this house feel like a family. You need to start showing some appreciation." Jennifer snapped her head up, anger flaring in her eyes. "A family? He doesn't belong here, Mom. You're the only one who doesn't see it. He's manipulating you." "Enough." Tracey's voice was sharp. "I won't have you disrespecting him in my house. He's done nothing but support us." Jennifer scoffed and pushed her chair back, storming off to her room without another word. As she lay in bed that night, tears silently streamed down her face. She felt utterly alone. No one believed her. Not her mother, not her friends. There was no one left to turn to. Meanwhile, Benson continued his manipulation with precision. He was careful not to overstep too soon, always maintaining a veneer of calm, dependable charm in front of Tracey. When she brought up Jennifer's accusations, he would shake his head with a solemn expression. "Tracey, I would never do anything to hurt her," he said softly. "Maybe she's struggling with the changes in your life. Teenagers can be unpredictable." Tracey sighed, guilt washing over her. "Maybe I'm being too hard on her." "No," Benson reassured her. "You're doing the best you can. You're a great mother. Don't let her behavior make you doubt yourself." His words soothed her fears, reinforcing the belief that Jennifer was overreacting. Little by little, Benson's control deepened as Tracey continued to overlook his subtle manipulations. Then one evening, Tracey came home from work to an unsettling silence. Jennifer wasn't in her room or anywhere in the house. Tracey frowned, assuming her daughter had gone to visit a friend. Hours passed and the worry began to creep in. She called several of Jennifer's friends, but none of them had seen her. "Maybe she's just blowing off some steam," Benson suggested casually when Tracey voiced her concerns. "Teenagers do that sometimes. She'll be back." "But this isn't like her," Tracey murmured, pacing the living room. "She usually tells me where she's going." Benson placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "You're overthinking it. Give her some time. Don't go running to the police and making a scene. You'll only embarrass her if it turns out to be nothing." Tracey hesitated. His words seemed reasonable, but an uncomfortable knot formed in her stomach. She nodded reluctantly, convincing herself that Jennifer would walk through the door at any moment. But the hours stretched into days. Jennifer didn't return, and her phone remained switched off. Tracey's anxiety turned into full-blown panic. She called everyone she could think of, neighbors, relatives, her friends Angela and Tina, but no one had any information. Each call ended in frustration and despair. "Benson, it's been 3 days," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I can't just sit here. I have to go to the police." Benson's expression darkened for a brief moment before softening again. "I understand you're worried, Tracey, but think about how this will look. The police might assume the worst and cause unnecessary trouble. Just give it one more day." Tracey hesitated again, torn between her fear for Jennifer and her trust in Benson. Against her better judgment, she agreed to wait. But that night, sleep eluded her. Every creak and shadow in the house seemed to whisper of Jennifer's absence. Her mother's instincts screamed at her that something was terribly wrong. By the 4th day, Tracey could no longer deny the truth. Jennifer was missing, and something had to be done. She finally gathered the courage to go to the police, her hands shaking as she explained the situation. The officers listened but scolded her for not reporting it sooner. "Time is crucial in missing person cases," one officer said sternly. "Why did you wait so long?" Tracey lowered her gaze in shame. She had no answer that made sense, no excuse that could justify her delay. All she could do was hope that it wasn't too late to find her daughter. As the investigation began, Tracey was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that she had made a grave mistake, one that could cost her Jennifer forever. Tracey sat quietly in the police station, her hands trembling as she clutched a photograph of Jennifer. Officers moved briskly around her, filing reports and answering phones, their hurried voices blending into an overwhelming buzz of activity. She barely registered the questions directed at her, nodding absent-mindedly as one of the detectives scribbled notes on a pad. The weight of Jennifer's disappearance hung heavily on her shoulders, suffocating her with guilt and fear. "Miss Briggs, I need you to focus," the detective said, his tone firm but not unkind. "When was the last time you saw your daughter?" Tracey blinked, struggling to pull herself from the haze of panic clouding her thoughts. "It was 3 days ago," she whispered. "She was home. Everything seemed normal." 3 days is a long time to wait before reporting a missing person, the detective continued. His brows furrowed. "Why did you wait so long?" Tracey lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. What could she say? That she had trusted Benson's reassurances? That she had ignored every instinct screaming that something was wrong? Her silence spoke volumes, and the detective sighed heavily. "We'll do everything we can, but time is critical in cases like this," handing her a form to sign. "Give us all the places Jennifer might have gone, friends, hangouts, anywhere she might feel safe." Tracey nodded numbly and provided the details, though deep down she knew Jennifer wouldn't have just run off. There was no explanation that fit. As she left the station, the cool evening breeze did little to ease her anxiety. Riverton felt eerily still, as if the town it shared her unease. At home, Benson was waiting for her. He stood in the doorway, his expression a mask of concern. He immediately rushed to her side when he saw her pale, tear-streaked face. "Tracey, where have you been?" "I was worried sick," he said, wrapping an arm around her. "You've been gone for hours." "I went to the police," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't wait anymore. Jennifer's been gone too long." Benson's face tightened for a brief moment before he softened his expression. "I understand. You had to do what you thought was best, but I wish you'd told me. I would have gone with you." "I didn't think." Tracey shook her head, exhaustion clouding her thoughts. "I just needed to do something. I can't keep sitting around waiting for her to come back." "You did the right thing," Benson assured her, leading her inside. "We'll find her, I promise." True to his word, Benson became heavily involved in the search efforts. He accompanied Tracey to every neighborhood inquiry, knocked on doors, and even organized small search parties with neighbors and friends. He seemed genuinely invested in finding Jennifer, his concern visible in the way he spoke to the authorities and offered updates to Tracey. "We've covered most of the area near the park," he told her one evening. "I think tomorrow we should expand the search to the abandoned factory near the outskirts of town. Teenagers sometimes hang out there." Tracey nodded, grateful for his support. It was hard to imagine how she would cope without him. He was steady, strong, a pillar in her crumbling world. Whenever fear threatened to consume her, Benson was there to anchor her. However, not everyone was convinced of Benson's sincerity. Angela and Tina had both noticed subtle changes in his behavior, though they remained cautious about voicing their concerns directly. One evening, Angela pulled Tracey aside after a neighborhood search meeting. "Tracey, can we talk?" Angela asked, her voice low. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Tracey responded, brushing her hair out of her face. Angela hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I know Benson's been really helpful, but don't you think it's strange how involved he is? Almost too involved?" Tracey frowned, crossing her arms defensively. "What are you trying to say, Angela? That Benson has something to do with Jennifer's disappearance? That's ridiculous." "I'm not accusing him," Angela said quickly. "I just think you should be careful. People can wear masks, Tracey. They can pretend to be something they're not." "Benson's been nothing but supportive," Tracey snapped. "He's done more to help than anyone else. Maybe you should be focusing on finding Jennifer instead of stirring up paranoia." Angela sighed, realizing there was no point in pushing further. Tracey's mind was made up, blinded by her trust in Benson. The conversation left a bitter taste in both their mouths, and they parted with strained goodbyes. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation. Officers interviewed neighbors and searched locations Jennifer was known to frequent, but no leads emerged. Days turned into a week, and Tracey's hope began to waver. She barely slept, her mind consumed with nightmarish thoughts of what might have happened to her daughter. Each time she felt herself slipping into despair, Benson was there with comforting words and gestures. He played his role flawlessly, projecting an image of the devoted partner and protector. Yet beneath the surface, his calm demeanor masked a dangerous secret, one that would soon unravel in ways Tracey couldn't yet imagine. As the search efforts dragged on with no results, Tracey found herself teetering on the edge of collapse. The fear of losing Jennifer forever gnawed at her soul, but she refused to give up. She clung to the hope that her daughter was still alive, somewhere out there waiting to be found. But in the shadows of her mind, doubt lingered, unspoken but ever present. The truth was closer than she realized, hidden in plain sight. Tracey sat on the edge of Jennifer's bed, her fingers tracing the delicate patterns on the bedspread. The air in the room felt heavy, as if time itself frozen since the day Jennifer disappeared. The police had made little progress, and Tracey's anxiety had reached a fever pitch. Benson continued to offer reassurances, but they were beginning to feel hollow. Something inside her was shifting, an unease she could no longer suppress, though she still didn't know where to direct it. Desperate for any clue, Tracey began searching through Jennifer's belongings. She told herself it was just a way to feel close to her daughter, but deep down she hoped to find something, anything that could lead her to answers. She sifted through school notebooks, folded clothes, and trinkets that Jennifer had collected over the years. Everything seemed ordinary until her hand brushed against a small, locked box hidden beneath a pile of old books in the closet. Her heart pounded as she retrieved the box and set it on the bed. She didn't recall ever seeing it before. After a brief search, she found the key tucked inside one of Jennifer's desk drawers. When she opened the box, she discovered a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with Jennifer's neat handwriting. Tracey hesitated for a moment, a sense of guilt washing over her. This was her daughter's private world, one she had never intended for anyone to see. But Tracey was beyond the point of respecting boundaries. She needed answers. Slowly she opened the diary and began to read. The early entries were innocent enough, accounts of school life, friendships, and dreams for the future. But as she turned the pages, the tone shifted. Jennifer began writing about Benson, and Tracey's hands shook as she read the words. "There's something wrong with him. He always watches me when he thinks no one else is looking. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like he's waiting for something. I feel trapped whenever he's around." Tracey's breath caught in her throat. She flipped to another entry. "Last night I woke up and saw him standing in my room. He didn't say anything, just stared at me like he was studying me. I was too scared to move. Told Mom, but she just laughed it off. I feel so alone. She won't believe me no matter what I say." Tears streamed down Tracey's face as she continued reading. Entry after entry detailed Jennifer's growing fear of Benson, how he would find reasons to be near her, how his behavior grew more invasive with each passing day. Jennifer had tried to reach out for help, but Tracey had dismissed her concerns as paranoia. No, this can't be true," Tracey whispered to herself, clutching the diary to her chest. But deep down, she knew it was. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. All the moments she had ignored, all the warnings Jennifer had tried to give her, now screamed at her with brutal clarity. Unable to sit still, Tracey grabbed the diary and rushed to the police station. Her hands trembled as she handed it over to the lead detective, barely able to speak through her sobs. The officer flipped through the pages, his expression growing grim. "This is serious," he said, looking up at her. "We need to bring Benson in for questioning again." Tracey nodded, her mind spinning with disbelief and guilt. How had she allowed herself to be so blinded? How had she trusted someone so completely while ignoring her own daughter's cries for help? The police moved quickly. Benson was summoned for interrogation, maintaining his calm facade as he answered their questions. He even managed to feign shock when they confronted him with the diary. "Jennifer was a troubled girl," he said, his voice steady. "She must have been imagining things. I would never hurt her. I cared about her like she was my own." His performance was convincing, but the detectives were no longer buying his act. They pressed him harder, their questions cutting deeper. For the first time, Benson's composure began to crack. He stumbled over his words, his excuses growing less coherent. The turning point came when the police obtained a warrant to search his property. Hidden in the trunk of his car, they found items belonging to Jennifer, her missing phone, a bracelet Tracey had given her on her last birthday. The evidence was damning. When confronted with the discoveries, Benson finally broke. His calm demeanor gave way to panic and he confessed. He had confronted Jennifer on the night she disappeared. He tried to touch her. She refused and began screaming, afraid that she would report his behavior to the authorities. In a fit of desperation, he had silenced her forever. Tracey collapsed in the station's waiting room when the news reached her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The man she had loved and trusted had taken her daughter's life. The weight of her failure crushed her, and she sobbed uncontrollably. "How could I have let this happen?" she whispered, over and over again. The officers gave her space, understanding the depth of her grief. Benson was taken into custody, his fate sealed by his own confession. But for Tracey, there was no relief in his arrest, only an endless abyss of sorrow and regret. The world she had built around her and Jennifer had crumbled, leaving her to face the consequences of the trust she had misplaced. The courtroom was eerily silent as the judge's gavel echoed off the high walls. Benson sat at the defense table, his face devoid of the charm and warmth that had once fooled everyone. His shoulders sagged in resignation, knowing there was no escape from the fate that awaited him. Across the room, Tracey sat in the front row, her eyes hollow and distant. She hadn't spoken a word since the trial began. The diary, Jennifer's last testimony, had been more than enough to seal Benson's fate. "Benson Oti, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole," the judge declared. The finality of the words hung in the air like a death knell. Tracey barely heard the murmurs that followed as people began to shuffle out of the courtroom. Angela and Tina, who had attended every hearing in quiet support, glanced at her with a mixture of sympathy and pity. They wanted to reach out to her, to offer some comfort, but Tracey avoided their gaze. She didn't deserve their kindness, not after everything that had happened. She stood slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. Every step she took out of the courthouse felt heavier than the last. The sunlight outside was blinding, and she raised a hand to shield her eyes, though it did little to soften the harsh reality she now faced. Jennifer was gone, and no amount of justice could change that. The days that followed were a blur. Tracey withdrew from the world, her once vibrant presence in Riverton reduced to a ghostly shadow. The house that had once been filled with Jennifer's laughter now felt like a tomb. Every room echoed with memories that Tracey could no longer bear to confront. The kitchen table, where they had shared countless meals and conversations, remained untouched. Jennifer's room remained exactly as she had left it, but Tracey couldn't bring herself to enter again. She stopped going to work, ignoring the concerned calls from her boss and co-workers. Angela and Tina tried to visit, but Tracey refused to answer the door. Eventually, they stopped coming, respecting her need for isolation even if they worried for her well-being. Tracey wanted it that way. She didn't want anyone's pity or understanding. She deserved to be alone. Nights were the worst. The silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tracey often found herself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by visions of Jennifer's frightened eyes. The guilt gnawed at her like a relentless beast, whispering accusations in the darkness. "You didn't listen. You chose him over her." She replayed every moment in her mind, the times Jennifer had tried to warn her, the arguments, the tears. How had she been so blind? How had she allowed herself to be manipulated so easily? Benson's charm had been a mask, but it was her own desperate longing for companionship that had blinded her to the truth. One night, Tracey found herself standing in front of Jennifer's closet. Her hands trembled as she reached for a dress Jennifer had loved, a simple blue sundress that brought out her eyes. She clutched it to her chest and sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The walls seemed to close in around her as memories of her daughter flooded her mind. "I'm so sorry, Jennifer," she whispered through her tears. "I should have protected you. I should have listened." But there was no answer. There never would be. Weeks turned into months, and Tracey became a recluse. The once supportive neighbors now whispered behind her back, their sympathy gradually giving way to judgment. In their eyes, she had failed as a mother, and no one wanted to be associated with her grief and shame. Tracey didn't care. Their opinions meant nothing compared to the crushing burden she carried within herself. She sold her house and moved to a small rundown apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the prying eyes of those who knew her past. The walls were bare, the rooms cold and lifeless, but it suited her. It was a fitting punishment for someone who had lost everything. She lived a life of quiet penance, barely speaking to anyone. The few people who saw her described her as a hollow shell, a woman consumed by grief and regret. Occasionally, Angela would leave voicemails, offering to meet for coffee or simply talk, but Tracey never responded. She couldn't face her old friends, not after ignoring their warnings about Benson. They had been right, and she had been too blinded by her own desires to see it. As the years passed, Tracey's world grew smaller. She spent most of her days sitting by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. Her once youthful face was now lined with sorrow, her eyes dull and lifeless. The only moments of solace came when she visited Jennifer's grave, leaving flowers and quietly speaking to the headstone as if her daughter could hear her. "I miss you so much," she would whisper, her voice breaking. "I hope you can forgive me someday." But deep down, Tracey knew she could never forgive herself. The weight of her choices was a lifelong sentence, one that would follow her until her final breath. No matter how much time passed, the guilt never lessened. It clung to her like a second skin, a constant reminder of the price she had paid for her blindness. Tracey Briggs lived out the remainder of her days in quiet isolation, her life reduced to a cycle of grief and regret. No one visited her, and when she finally passed away years later, there was no funeral service, just a simple burial attended by a handful of strangers who knew nothing of the tragedy that had defined her existence. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.